Welcome to the fourth episode of the GameFor Podcast. This episode's topic is going to be crowdfunding in tabletop gaming, and I'm one of your hosts, Adam.
And I'm Matt.
And we're part of the team at Milkcan, as you can see behind us on the board. And we're the company that has built and designed the GameFor app. GameFor is designed for connecting tabletop gamers so that you can find people to play with at local stores, local events, local conventions, local groups and clubs, other players, whatever. And so this podcast is generally about things related to tabletop gaming, generally more about community building, but we're going to talk about something different, like I said, this week, and we're going to be talking about crowdfunding in tabletop gaming, which to some degree kind of has something to do, I think, with the community, because it's definitely changed the landscape and stuff like that.
Yep.
But we'll get into that in a little bit of time. Instead, what we're going to talk about is, right now, we're going to quickly just recap kind of like what we've been doing since the last podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You were in Florida.
I was in Florida, at NASA.
Got a cool shirt.
I was at we were in Orlando, but we did it as a family and did it as a road trip, and I was even able to make a day at Dice Tower Con in Orlando.
Yeah.
So first time down there.
So you were down there at the same time as Dice Tower Con.
Yep. So
that was part of the plan, right?
Yeah. That's kind of why we went to Florida in July.
Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, we probably would have done some.
That's not fun. Otherwise, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you are a board gamer, and especially if you're into the Dice Tower crew and their podcast, big place to go. Mm-hmm. I mean, I lost track of how many board games were there. Admittedly, if you are into other genres and not into the board games, not probably your crowd.
Sure. Yeah.
As you would gather based on their podcast, but
yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, there was a lot of board games happening, and some pitch cars, like the largest pitch car track I think in the world.
That's a big one, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it was multiple tables long and around.
Is pitch car? Are they actual little tiny cars, or are they like little discs?
They're kind of like a little disc. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I've seen games like that.
Yep.
What's the one? Is it? I'm probably mispronouncing it. Crokinole or Crokinole? It's more of a little discs, and you're hitting them back and forth trying to knock people off. But the pitch car I've seen where it's more like a track, and you're trying to get around.
He's got
like
loops in there and
loops,
chicanes and everything. Yeah.
Wow.
It was impressive.
Makes my finger hurt already just to think the thwacking. Well, that's kind of cool. And it was a decent sized convention. I mean, it was like 2,000 people.
Yeah, 3,000 tickets were sold. So yeah, but it didn't feel crowded either. So,
yeah.
We were there on Friday, so maybe it picks up a little bit more on Saturday. But
sure.
It seemed like a good convention. Huge location that was at the as far as like the hotel and stuff. So I'm assuming they have plenty of rooms.
Well, I mean, with Orlando being such a vacation spot, destination, and all that kind of stuff, it makes sense that they would have a lot of like convention space and things like that.
Right.
So yeah.
Yep.
No, that's very cool. How
about yourself?
Let's see. Well, I've not been doing a ton lately. I haven't, thankfully, been doing any traveling pretty much at all during the month of July after my June and previous. I have been playing some Kill Team, some Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team, which is the small-scale skirmish version of 40K. I'm in a campaign with a friend of mine, and we had a game actually, what day is today? 2 or 3 days ago, we got together and played.
Now, how does the campaign differ from just regular?
So it's a series of games kind of linked together. You play a game, and then at the end, the soldiers, models, whatever you want to call them, that got knocked out or killed, like out of action. You have to roll on a chart for each of them, and maybe they will be fine. The medic will come along and fix them. Or maybe they'll be out for a game and then they can come back later.
Okay.
Or there's all kinds of different things, and it depends on the game. In this game, like, there is a possibility that they just outright die.
Oh, wow.
And then you have to, for your next game, swap in something else. Now, you'd say to yourself, well, I guess it doesn't matter because you can just swap in a new person and it's no big deal. But the thing is that, especially if they are the specialists in the army as opposed to just to the regular guys.
Okay.
And again, when I say army, I'm talking about you can't have more than 20 models in your
right.
And I'm usually running 9 or something like that. But I did lose my communications specialist.
Okay.
He died, just straight up died. So I can bring back another communications specialist, but then he will be further behind in points. Like every game that you play, you get like an experience point, and then once you hit 3 experience points, then you get to go up a level, and then and sometimes you can get extra experience points for doing certain things and stuff like that. And now that he's dead, if I bring back a new communications guy, that guy starts at 0.
Oh, okay. So he's back to 0. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then what you're basically trying to do is that you have, it's kind of odd. You have these 4 different resources, and they all start at 8 points.
Okay.
And for every game that you play, if you lose a campaign game, depending on the mission, some missions tell you that you then have to lose like a certain number of points spread across, or sometimes they tell you have to lose a certain number of points, but in just one of those 4 areas.
Okay.
And the trick is you're trying to get one of basically the team that, or the side that loses, and what ends the campaign is when one of the 2 teams has got one of their resources that's at 0.
Okay.
So you can kind of mitigate it, but it's not just like there are a lot of games out there that it's like, oh, we're going to play 3 games and that's our campaign. Like this will go on for a while. Like at this point right now, I think that I have 3 things that are at 7 and 1 still at 8, and my opponent has 2 things at 7 and 2 at 8 or something like that. After 3 games, because it's been.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's it can take a while, but it's fun. We get together every couple of weeks, depending on travel and stuff like that. And he's busy with his job sometimes too. So it's just nice to be able to keep track of that. I've got it like written down in my iPad, so we know where we're at and all that stuff.
Very cool.
Otherwise, I've been building and painting Star Wars Legion, mostly Stormtroopers. I've been getting into Star Wars Legion. Star Wars Legion is a Star Wars related miniatures game, tabletop war game, made by Fantasy Flight.
Okay, yeah.
Who is the same folks that make Keyforge, and they made the X-Wing game, and they make a lot of different stuff, obviously. Pretty big, but they've gotten into this about a year ago. The game's about a year old now, and so they're coming up with new expansions right around the time just after Gen Con. There's a new expansion that's going to be basically Clone Wars, so you're going to have the Clone Troopers versus the droids, but the first set when it first launched was classic Stormtroopers versus Rebels.
Okay.
And you got your Darth Vaders and your, Princess Leia's and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I've been putting the models together and painting them and stuff like that. Stormtroopers go pretty quick, as it turns out, because they're predominantly white with a little bit of black.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So I've been enjoying that.
Now, are they able to aim in this game? Or
there's a lot of jokes about that, but actually they're not nearly as bad in the game as they are in the movies.
That's good.
Yeah, they're actually that would be a thing. You would think that they would just only hit on 6s or something like that. But it's not the way it works, as it turns out. So yeah, but yeah, it's an interesting game system. Like it's very different than say 40K and other the big ones like that. It's a little bit more. I would almost say it's more board gamey a little bit, in that you've got these custom dice. You've got a card for each unit, and there's lots of like icons and things and stuff, and it's not like. In my mind, at least, it seems as if 40K specifically, and also Age of Sigmar, also made by Games Workshop, I would say those games are a bit more mathematical. Everything is numbers and stats. And in this, it's
closer to like the X-Wing.
Yeah, because you've got, like sometimes like this character or this unit, if you roll this, it'll do this, and other units don't have that. So if you roll that, it doesn't do anything. And you can get more granular, where instead of just going, we're using 6-siders. I mean, this game uses 6-siders and also 8-siders.
All right.
But they all have special symbols on them all.
Okay.
It's all custom dice. So the upside is it's not just a sliding scale from 1 to 6 or 1 to 8. You can have, 3 of these things are going to do nothing. One side's going to do this. One side's going to do this weird, strange thing only if you have this icon, and this other thing's going to do a hit, and this other thing's going to do a crit. That kind of stuff.
Okay.
So it's interesting that way, and it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it is a cool game, and the models are honestly easier to build than most like 40K and a lot of other games. Not that those models are hard, but these do go together really quickly, because they're like this literally the Stormtroopers are 2 pieces. Like it's the head, the body, and the legs are all one piece, and then you snap on the arms that are already holding the gun, and you just kind of and then you're done. So it's nice. It's kind of a bit of a change.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, why don't we talk a little bit about the subject? Crowdfunding and how it relates to tabletop gaming.
Yes.
Crowdfunding is big in tabletop gaming. Crowdfunding is, you've got Kickstarter, you've got IndieGoGo. There's other ones as well. Those are the 2 biggest, I think. Crowdfunding is designed mainly so that if you have an idea,
Right.
you've got some sort of idea, whether it's an idea for an invention or a game, or you want to do a
business or
an album,
Yeah.
you know, because you're a
Movie,
musician
yeah.
or whatever you want to do, but you don't have necessarily the money up front.
Right.
What you do is you make this kind of presentation through their system where you make a decent video and you put lots of drawings and pictures of things that you're going to do or whatever it is, and maybe a prototype if you've got it or whatever, and you go, look, this is what I'm going to do. And if I can make at least this much money, and you set a kind of goal,
Right.
let's say it's $50,000. I need at least $50,000 to make this happen. And then people can basically pay up front, and it's kind of like pre-ordering, but
Not guaranteed,
Not
right.
guaranteed, number one.
Right.
So if it turns out that people don't like the idea and you don't hit the goal of pledges,
Right.
then it just doesn't happen. No harm, no foul. Everybody's, because you don't get charged until you don't get charged until you get until the campaign hits its goal,
Right.
and also runs out of time.
Because
The campaigns can be
I think
15 days,
right.
30 days, 60 days. I mean, there's a ton of different settings you can set in there,
Right.
and there's a lot of strategy that people talk about how long it should be or how short it should be, and all
there's
that kind of
there's
jazz.
some out there that I think IndieGoGo you could have an unspecified time, and
That's true, and I think also IndieGoGo you cannot hit your target too.
you can
Yeah, you can still get the money.
You can set it to be funded. You get the money no matter what.
Right, and it depends on how you're doing that.
Right.
But for Kickstarter in general, it seems to me like you have to hit a goal, and if you don't hit the goal, nothing happens.
Right.
So,
And you get rewards based on your pledge level.
generally, yeah. Like as you pledge more money, like you have like a tier that says, oh, well, at the $50 tier, you're going to get the copy of the game, and you're going to get all the possible stretch goals, which we'll explain in a sec. And you'll get maybe a free shirt or whatever.
Right.
I don't know. But then the next goal could be $75. And if you do the $75 tier, well, then that gives you all that stuff above, plus also the mug
or
whatever.
like an extra copy of the game for a friend.
Yeah, or something like that. So there's all these different tiers. And sometimes you'll see these tiers go totally crazy.
Yes.
Like for $10,000, we will fly to your house and play the game with you.
Right,
Or whatever.
right,
That
right.
kind of
Oh, yeah,
stuff.
there's-
And they will have, and you can set it like a goal or a limit
right.
where you can be like, there's only one of these, or
Right.
there's maybe like only 5 of these, or whatever.
Imagine having to go to everybody's house.
Well, I mean, if you got that many $10,000 pledges, that'd be a different story.
I suppose.
Yeah, but I mean, like sometimes it's like if you pay this much money, then you get maybe a portrait of you in the game that
Right.
goes into the book, and they don't want to do 60
right, or
of
they
them.
only have like 4 characters, so they
Exactly.
Yep.
So there's that. Plus, there's also even sometimes they do it like early bird stuff,
Mm-hmm.
where like if you're the first, if you do the early bird thing, there's only 200 of those, and that's to help drive.
Early pledging.
Velocity, really.
Yes,
Like
yep.
because Kickstarter's got a lot of the same algorithms to some degree that YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and that kind of stuff have, where if they notice that all of a sudden, you started your thing and you hit your goal in the first 12 hours, and then you even doubled it like in the next 12 hours or something like that, one of the big benefits of Kickstarter for the designers, the creators, is not only that it allows you to prepay for your whatever your project is you're trying to make happen. It's also a marketing arm. It is when people talk about, oh, hey, this Kickstarter went live. Like if you just decided, oh, hey, I'm going to start selling this thing.
Right.
Whatever it is. You saved up the money or whatever you did. You took out a loan. You built this product and you put it out there. Ta-da, we put it out there.
Right.
Put out a bunch of press releases and do all that kind of stuff, and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't,
Right.
whatever. You're hoping for some sort of influencer maybe to like pick up on it and go, oh, this is really cool, and talk about it on Instagram, or
Right.
who knows what. But when you're like, oh, I'm on a Kickstarter, I just launched a Kickstarter, for whatever reason, Kickstarters are news these days.
Yes.
In tabletop gaming. So it's almost a little bit like free marketing, and Kickstarter because they take a cut. If you raised $1 million, they get like 9% of it or something like that.
Yeah, I
Last I
forget
heard.
the exact percentage.
Yeah. So it's in their best interest for you to make as much money as possible as well, because it helps them to make more money. So they also do some of that marketing and let people know
Right.
and put it out there in SEO and all that kind of jazz. So it's interesting that way. It's a great system for getting a game set up that you don't have the money to fund yourself. It's great for small creators. It's great for small designers and things like that. It's great for products that maybe are super niche even within our niche market.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, where you're not sure, does anyone even care about this?
Exactly.
Right. So.
And so you can find out, and maybe it turns out, no, not enough people care,
right.
or whatever. And so, that's fine. It's like, okay, cool. Well, I'll just go back and do something else, or whatever.
And we're also starting to see whether, a company may even be established and they're doing it in a different genre or area, like Critical Role's doing a cartoon.
Right, yeah. So Critical Role's very well known. They're very well known,
right.
like, D&D streaming, like RPG streaming, really. Yep. More thing. But they wanted to do an animated show.
Right, and I'm pretty sure that they tried to shop it around beforehand, if I remember the story correctly, and everyone, basically said,
well, it's the classic tale of like, nah, that's never going to work.
There's no money in that.
There's no money in that. Oh, okay, cool. So then they went out and Kickstarted it.
And $12 million later.
$12 million later, yeah. They were trying to raise originally, do you remember how much?
I think it was $500,000.
Yeah. And instead they raised 12. And the thing about that particular Kickstarter, because there's a lot of Kickstarters out there. I did a Kickstarter that's not gaming related a number of years ago where you paid a certain amount of money and then you would get a Blu-ray of the short film when it finally got filmed.
Right.
So you're basically just paying up front for a copy of the short film, which then causes the short film to have a budget enough to be able to make it. Right.
Yep.
Exactly. But I was going to get something out of it.
Right.
You know what I mean? But like a lot of those Critical Role tier levels, you didn't get much of anything. Like sometimes you got stickers,
or credit, or download ringtones or something.
Yeah, it was like not like, oh, we're going to send you, the Blu-ray of it. We're going to send you this. We're going to do this. We're going to, here's a T-shirt, and all that kind of stuff. You were not basically like pre-buying. Oh, I'm going to just prepay for this product. Right. You were basically saying, I want this to happen, and I will give money so that it can, and it went crazy for them. I mean, there were articles, there were stuff about it on Forbes and like CNBC and things like that. This is like role playing game.
Yep. I remember that at one point they finally started like, okay, we are not doing anything more with the amount of money that we're getting. Please donate to these other, spread the money around.
They originally were going to do one episode, right?
Yeah,
that was the plan, and then now they're doing 6 or 8 because they made so much money.
Like 2 seasons or something.
So that's an extreme case. That doesn't happen to everybody, Lord knows. And although Kickstarter has got a lot of great things, and I know personally people who've done projects that have worked out well for them enough so that they can create this thing that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to create, there's also, in some situations, not good things coming out of Kickstarter as well, or crowdfunding in general.
It is definitely not a store. It is you are investing in someone's idea and investing in that person, really.
There are plenty of stories of tons of people kicking in, making, raising it up, hitting the goal, hitting stretch goals, which we didn't just explain stretch goals. Stretch goals are like when you go over, let's say you're trying to raise $50,000. Right. You say, okay, great. Well, now we've hit $50,000. If we hit $60,000, then we'll add in some other thing.
Right. It's basically a way to go, we hit our goal. Now let's see how far we can go.
Exactly. And sometimes stretch goals can just keep adding on and just be crazy that way too. But as a company, you can sometimes just do gangbusters on Kickstarter and then either never actually get the product finished due to all kinds of different reasons. Sometimes those stretch goals can really come back. I mean, people now have learned more about Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. I think there were a lot of people who were just like blown away by how much response they got. Right. So they kept adding more and more stretch goals, which got more and more people involved. And then at the end of the day, when it was time to actually start shipping all that stuff, because initially when Kickstarter came out, normally shipping was included. Right. So like one of the earliest Kickstarters that I got into, which we'll talk about in a little bit, the shipping box was 27 pounds on that. And they made a ton of money and did not probably break even because of the shipping costs. Right. So now nearly every Kickstarter that I've seen since has been like, this is the price. It does not include shipping. Yes. And we'll tell you what the shipping is depending on your country or whatever, you know, whatever. And it's usually either after the thing's done or else they've already gone through. Like if they have a really good idea of about how much it's going to weigh, they're like, it's going to cost this much.
Yeah, or here's an estimated cost, and then they'll give you final cost at the end.
But there are people who've gone out of business because of Kickstarter. Yes. Like there was a guy, I read a blog post by a guy who did some sort of big resin dragon
Okay.
Like, and you were going to be buying this huge resin dragon and all that kind of stuff, and it went gangbusters. It was like really expensive and all that stuff, but it went gangbusters, and he was amazed, and he had all this money, and then started to realize that using the company he was working with or whatever the deal was, like he could get one passable, pour resin sculpt out of every 10 attempts. Ooh. Like he lost his house. Like,
wow.
Oh yeah, it was something. Just look up Kickstarter Dragon. I lost my house, and you'll find the guy's article. I mean, it did not go well for him.
But did he? Because of that, he did fulfill them.
Well, yeah, because he to try to fulfill them, like he had to spend so much extra money, and so I think he did fulfill it. And there are, like I said, there's plenty of stories of people not actually being able to fulfill it or anything along those lines.
Right.
And Kickstarter specifically has added new kind of rules almost to their terms and conditions, saying you need to try to hit this date, because that was the big thing that was happening a lot too, is they'd be like, oh yeah, we're going to ship it, because it always says we're going to ship it and there's a certain date.
Right.
And
it would always be like,
it was almost always. Yeah, because manufacturing is tricky.
Right.
That's why it's, that's why professionals do it. And so when you're a small creator who's starting out and you're like, no, this is be great, it'll be awesome, I talked to the printing people already, everything's great, and then you now you've got this huge order, and the printing company's like, we can't handle an order that big.
Right. We're 9 months out before
our 9 months, or our press is broken, or whatever the problem is,
right.
And then all these things happen. So, yeah, but it's got its good and its bad, and there's of course then the retailer aspect as well. So, one of the big popular ones that came out early on was a game called Zombicide, which probably most of us have heard about.
Yep.
And it sold like gangbusters, huge success on Kickstarter. But there was a lot of stores that were like, well, like when Cool Mini or Not finally actually brought it to distribution so you could then buy it,
right.
There were stores that were like, well, it was super popular when it was a Kickstarter, we better bring it in and have it here in the store. And then a lot of stores started to realize that the people who had already been interested in it already did the Kickstarter,
right,
and didn't need another copy.
Exactly.
And so a lot of copies sat in stores in a lot of situations. And now what you're seeing Kickstarters doing a lot of times is they're like, hey, we've got a retail package where you can prove to us you're a retailer, you can buy let's say 5 of them for like a cheaper price, and then you have those that you can put in your store. And you don't have to wait until we actually get to distribution. You can get them early and that kind of stuff and whatever.
Which
so there's solutions.
Yeah, it's given a lot more, I would say, popular stance on them from the retailer side.
It's made the retailers a little bit happier, yeah, because that was like another big one too is the Reaper Bones. Reaper Bones are these, generally they're usually white, although now the newer Reaper Bones, the new material is a little bit darker gray, and they refer to it as Reaper Black, but it's these white plastic miniatures, mainly fantasy, but lots of other stuff as well. And they are just an inexpensive plastic. They're inexpensive models. And some of the Kickstarters they've done 3 or 4, I think, at this point, and I think a 5th one is coming up, or else the 5th one's already happened. But millions of dollars they've made with these, and like, it's one of those deals where there's all these stretch goals. We're like, hey, look, we're going to ship you 100 models. But if we beat this number, we're adding 20 more. And if we beat this number, we're adding this many more.
Right.
And then you're finally getting, like a year and a half later or whatever, you get a package in the mail and it's got 300 models in it. And you're like, well, that's a lot of,
Right.
And I almost pulled the trigger on the first one, actually. I almost did. It was like down to there was like less than 12 hours left. And there were like 5 models out of 150 that I really wanted. And I was like, well, I know what I'll do. I'll buy this Kickstarter. And this is the trick. I'll buy this Kickstarter. And then I will take the rest of these models that I don't particularly want. I'll flip them on eBay and I'll make money.
Nobody's thought of that.
Right. And then after about 5 minutes, I'm like, wait, everybody's going to do that. That's a terrible idea. And so I didn't pull the trigger. So what I did instead is I waited until those 5 models came out, and then I bought them separately. And it was considerably cheaper, as it turns out. So yeah, it totally depends. But I don't know. I think that there's a benefit in some fashion because from a community standpoint, when you decide to go with, like, say, a Kickstarter game, more often than not, depending on the game, you're going to get like everything that you're going to need to be able to teach your friends the game, or like, very frequently, and again in my world, in like miniatures and stuff like that, very frequently you end up getting at least 2 forces.
Right. So you've got a playable game with by the time you get that.
Yeah. So by the time you get it and you put it together, build it, paint it, whatever you're going to do, you can then go to your friend and go, look, I got 2 armies. Let's play.
Yep.
Whereas normally in miniatures, a lot of times the problem is that each person needs an army.
Right.
So it's sometimes difficult to get somebody who's completely new to it into it without having 2 armies yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with skirmish games that we've mentioned in the past, they're generally a lot smaller and it's a lot easier. But there's also something to be said for just getting a whole bunch of models, when you do one of those big Kickstarters and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing, and in the miniatures realm, again, my area, there is this kind of almost joke that goes around about when you end up doing a Kickstarter, it seems like a super good idea at the time, but then there is this buyer's remorse that frequently shows up. Admittedly, it's sometimes as many as 2 years later, but then all of a sudden one day you get this giant box and you're like, the heck is all of this? And you open it up and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And it's just it's a mass of plastic or resin or metal or whatever. So yeah, and then that just adds to your pile of things that are unpainted.
Right.
And with board games, we ran into it with we were at a convention in Milwaukee a couple years ago, and it was at night, and we were in the doing the board game library.
Right.
And we would check out a board game.
Right.
And from the board game library, and a lot of them were Kickstarters.
Yeah, they had the Kickstarter version
with the add-ons.
Uh-huh.
So we're trying to teach ourselves this new game, but we're not just trying to teach ourselves the base game. We're trying to teach ourselves the base game, but there's also tons of extra junk in the box.
Expansions, and everything's, because it's been played, it's all mixed together.
And so we didn't know what was what and all that. And so that can be also, admittedly, that's a narrow problem.
It was pretty niche, but yeah, we even had someone that had played like one of the games before, and he was just sitting there confused going, I don't remember this at all.
Exactly, yeah. No, there's so many different board games. It's hard to remember them. So, yeah, there's benefits to that, I think, sometimes with Kickstarting and community, because you've got so much of it, and usually at a pretty decent price. Like if you were to wait until some of this stuff, if it ever did hit retail, if you were to wait for it to hit retail, you're frequently going to be paying a bit more.
Yeah, usually you'll get it cheaper.
Sometimes exclusives too, with the Kickstarters.
Right, but generally you're also doing it basically sight unseen. Like there
true.
are ones that are going around the conventions, play testing it and getting that word out there. But a lot of times when you come to Kickstarter, you're just going off a video and some pictures going, yeah, that looks like something I might play, and then you go to play and you're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible.
Over the last several years, going to Gen Con, which I'll be going into again soon in a couple of weeks, amongst the friends that I go with, there's also another joke where you'll roll up to a booth and they will have this amazing looking game with these super cool miniatures and all this stuff and a great display and everything, and they spend a bunch of money and everything looks really awesome, and they show you like a quick demo or just an elevator pitch and explain it all to you, and you're like, wow, this is really cool. How much is it? And they're like, okay, well, it's going to be going on Kickstarter in 3 weeks, and then you're just like, and then you just walk away because you're like, well, I wanted it now. Like that's kind of the trick,
yeah.
And I don't begrudge them for doing the Kickstarter, but it seems weird to me to spend that much money to go to Gen Con
and not have at least
not have a way to actually get any kind of money out of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. So maybe that's a problem that'll get fixed down the road. Maybe there's some sort of way for Kickstarter to take pre-orders. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or something along those lines.
Early birds.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be nice. But yeah, there's times like I've ordered, one of the games I ordered, it was because I liked the first game, and this was like the sequel, and it was, going to be even better. And I was very excited when it came. Got ready to play it, and 2 of my friends that I was going to play it with, and they were big fans of the first one as well. They had played it and said, it's really not that good.
Yeah, see, that's...
And I'm like...
yeah.
So it's now sitting still shrunk wrapped in my closet.
Yeah. So, I think that one of the benefits to playing with people in your local area and that kind of community is that you can learn about new games that are very cool, and then maybe go out and pick them up yourself so you can play them with your other friends or whatever the deal is. And there's some benefit to that. I think one of the great benefits of going to game shops and playing with people at those places and whatever is to learn new stuff and to find out about new games and all that kind of jazz. And that's, I think, as a community aspect, this is super important. Crowdfunding is a little difficult in that situation because you're right, you are taking it a bit sight unseen.
Right. Or the flip side, you'll find out about a cool game. You'll play like I've played a number of board games. Well, I'm like, this is amazing. I like this. Good mechanics, awesome items. I'm like, where can I get this? And they're like, oh, I did it on Kickstarter, and now you can get it, but it costs twice as much and doesn't have all the parts of it that you liked.
Or even sometimes, like, these games companies will do the Kickstarter and then it just never goes to distribution.
Right.
They, fulfill the Kickstarter and do all of that, and everything's great, but they don't, like, after that, they're like, well, that's what we did. There
Right.
you go, it's done. And then people are like, come across it later on and are like, oh, that's really cool. And they're like, yeah, well, it's not.
You can't buy it
Yeah,
anymore.
go on eBay, I guess, and give that a try. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, I think that overall, when it is designed, when it does the thing it's supposed to do, when you're a really small group or a small company and you want to do this thing, and you get people interested in the community, you get them involved, and then they help fund it, and then you actually get it to them in a timely manner and all that kind of stuff, and then maybe even that actually springboards your company and gets it so you get into distribution with the big distributors and you start showing up in game stores and things like that. That's great. But I think sometimes it's not the way that it seems to be going. Although I do think that it's starting, the Kickstarter, the crowdfunding thing, Kickstarter is almost like Kleenex or Xerox to this point,
Right.
But as far as a brand name. But I do feel that the crowdfunding thing is starting to swing back a little bit, at least in tabletop gaming.
Yeah, I think it's getting a maturity point where people are understanding what it is, what it can do right, what stuff to kind of avoid or look for. So yeah, I think it's not quite as the Wild West as it was, even a couple of years ago.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Do we want to talk about some of our tabletop gaming Kickstarters?
So yeah, I mean, I'm assuming we've both done crowdfunding.
We've done some, yes. It's true.
The UPS and FedEx people know us.
Yeah, that's also true.
The first time I ever crowdfunded was for a board game. It was a game called Robot Turtles, and it was a game. What drew me into it, I forget even where I heard about it. I think I heard it from Coding Horror, which is a programming blog, and it was a game built by a computer programmer to teach his kids basically logic that goes into programming.
Sure.
My kids at the time were, the oldest, I think he was 5, so it was right at the perfect age for what it was going to be. Great price. I think I got 3 copies for $50.
Yeah.
So it was Christmas gifts that year and everything else. But yeah, that was the first time I got into it, and then they put a bunch of stretch goals. So the game that looked amazing at first had way more stuff in it by the time it shipped, and my kids liked it a lot, replayed it a lot. But yeah, that was, and then from there, that's what kind of got me into the itch of doing Kickstarter.
Yeah, that's cool.
How about you?
Oh gosh, I think my list is backwards. Let's see here. My first that I went on to my actual Kickstarter page and went back and looked at all the stuff because you've got a history there. And I think the earliest one I ever did for Kickstarter was for a role-playing game made by a friend of mine named Glenn called The World of Mistrunner. And I did it at a level where I got to, you could name like an NPC.
Okay.
So I didn't actually name an NPC. I actually named a monster in the game, or a type of creature in the game. So that was a lot of fun.
Is it what was the name?
It's called a rope ghost. Yeah. So the idea is that if you're walking out on the docks, like at night or whatever, you see what looks like a coil. It's kind of like a mimic.
Okay.
But you see like what looks like a coil of rope, just kind of hanging or dangling a little bit into the water. And so as you walk by, it reaches up and grabs you and like pulls you under and stuff like that.
Okay,
it's
that's
like,
kind of terrifying.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah, but it was actually an inside joke because the name Rope Ghost came from a misheard. A friend of mine was talking about, I don't know if it was like a clothing designer or a fragrance designer, but it was like something French. And like it was one of those things that you hear on the other side of the room when there's multiple conversations going on. And I just was like, did you say rope ghost? And he's like, what? And then for whatever reason, that just word stuck. And then, yeah. So, that was, I think, my first probably. It was,
nice.
It's a cool book.
Awesome. But any other notable ones that you've had?
Oh, I've got a big list here. The Ogre Designers Edition was Ogre by Steve Jackson Games, the company that you probably mostly know for Munchkin. Yep. Steve Jackson Games, the first game that they ever, I think, produced, I believe, was this game called Ogre, which is a sci-fi game It sounds like a fantasy game, but it's not. The ogre in the title is a giant unmanned cybernetic like AI tank. In the wars in the future, the whole point of the game is that one player has one unit and the other player has an army, and they are equally matched because this one unit, this ogre tank, which is the size of a city block and is covered in guns, can fight off the entire other. And so they're pretty evenly matched, and the idea is to just basically, it's like it was a strategy tabletop game originally that played like on an 11 by 17 sheet of like paper that had hexes on it, and you use little chips to be the different units and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And it was, I don't know, at this point now, it's I think 40 years ago when that first game came out in a little Ziploc bag and all that kind of stuff. And they hadn't made a new version of it in years and years and years. And then finally this whole crowdfunding thing started. And evidently Steve Jackson himself had been working on a new edition, and he wanted to make a bigger, like amazing version of the game.
His ideal version, probably.
Yeah. And but he was like, well, nobody actually cares. No one's actually going to pay attention. So finally someone's like, look, you should use this Kickstarter thing that people have heard about and use that, and then you'll be able to find out how many people are actually interested and want to buy it. So they went through all the stuff to build this Kickstarter edition, and instead of being little chips on a little tiny board, the board is massive now, and instead of chips, the ships, a lot of the units that you get, they're still cardboard, but they go together kind of like, do you remember the old, it was made by WizKids, it was called Pirates of the Spanish Main, and it was a game where you bought like a little deck, and it came with like you bought random packs, and there were like little pirate ships in them, and they were like printed on like almost like credit card material. And you punched them out, and then you stuck them together, and it was like slots. It was like slot and tab, and it was like a 3-dimensional, almost like a little mini puzzle. You would make these little tiny boats, and then you could unmake them if you wanted, and put them all back together and slide them into the thing. So these aren't plastic; these are thick chipboard, like 1/8 of an inch to a 1/4 inch thick chipboard.
Oh wow!
And like the biggest ogre tanks are easily, for those of you who aren't watching this and are just listening, they're probably a good 6 to 8 inches long.
Oh wow!
Just massive, huge things. And then there's lots. I mean, just there were thousands of pieces. Like when you open, I did finally get the box. When you open it up, the very first thing it says, "Do not just start punching out all of the cardboard in this box." Again, 27 pounds, by the way.
This is the 27 pound
this
box.
is the one. Do not start punching out all of the cardboard. That way leads madness. So I immediately started punching out all the cardboard, and it took me like a weekend. But yeah, this box is so big it doesn't fit under the bed. Like when I finally was like, I got to figure out where to put this thing. I was like, I'll put it up under the guest bed upstairs. No, it doesn't go under the bed. It is, seriously, that box is 2.5 to almost 3 feet long. It's got to be 14 inches tall. It's just a humongous. It was, I think, I don't know, $218 is how much I paid.
So there was a lot of angry delivery persons.
Oh my goodness, yeah. My UPS guy, because I was working at a previous job, was not happy. Like I came back to my cubicle and it was like blocking the door to my cubicle. It was just massive. And yeah, that was one where like they raised just shy of $1 million on that.
Oh wow.
$920,000.
Okay.
And I have been told by people in the past that they didn't actually make a profit because the shipping was so expensive. And that's one of those where like they just kept adding stretch goals and stretch goals and stretch goals, because originally they wanted to raise $60,000. He's like, if we could hit $60,000, that'd be great. They hit nearly $1 million.
Wow. Yep.
So, you know, in that situation, you're like, wow, that worked out really well, but not really, because, you know, turns out because of the shipping and all that kind of stuff. So that was a big one. Do you have any other big ones that you did, or fun ones?
Fireball Island was one that I did.
That was a big one.
Yeah, Restoration Games. They basically, their model, for those that aren't familiar with them, is to take, you know, the nostalgic board games of past, you know, ones that, you know,
you used to see as seen on TV,
childhood, and they buy the rights and they basically update it, kind of keep the parts that are good and fix the parts that have kind of not aged as well. So Fireball Island was one that I did. I did all the Kickstarter goals and full package,
add-ons, the whole thing,
add-ons and everything, and I got to introduce my kids to the game, and I still remember the game as not being. It was fun there a little bit, but I remember getting old. I have to say that the improvements made it a lot better game.
Yeah, no, I think I saw people. I saw the company that's selling it now. because you can just buy it like in
Right.
stores, right?
Yep. It's in stores. They've got a
but
new expansion coming out.
I
or
saw
out.
that they had a booth at Origins. I remember walking
Right.
by and seeing a lot of people standing around.
Yeah, there was a
playing
weird
it.
design choice to it, and they're like, "Oh no, it's going to make sense to you someday." And we're like,
Mm-hmm.
"Okay." Well, now they've got the first expansion that actually like feeds off the board a different way, and it fits right in.
Oh,
so
okay.
they've actually had this designed ahead of time, but they probably just didn't announce it in case
They've
it
been
didn't go
planning
well.
for a bit. Yeah, that
Right.
makes sense. That makes sense. That's cool. Gosh, I've done a bunch, as it turns out, and I've tried to dial back over the last couple of years, and I've been relatively successful.
Mm-hmm.
I did Wild West Exodus, which was a weird Wild West miniature kind of skirmish
Okay,
game.
yeah, they're around.
Yeah, but it's different now.
Oh, okay.
See, because originally when it was originally designed, it was actually originally designed by the folks at Battle Foam.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, so Battle Foam, like Romeo, who owns Battle Foam, like he worked with some people. I want to say he worked with one of the guys from the D6 Generation podcast, who's a writer, and that guy kind of worked on the fluff. I want to say Craig it was, I think, worked on the fluff, and then they worked on the rules and all that kind of stuff, and there were models, and they were decent models. They were nice looking models, and I picked that up. And then I didn't know anybody else around me who played, even though I had two forces and could have. There was like literally nobody within 60, 70, 80 miles that played. And then I had a guy that I know, a friend of a friend, who was really interested and wanted to get it. But now at that point, it wasn't in stores yet. So it was between the Kickstarter. And he had a bunch of people he was who lived near him who were playing
it. Oh, okay.
And so I was just like, all right, I'll sell you my copy. So I did that. So I haven't actually done it. But now that game the license has been bought, and it's been switched over to a company called War Cradle out of the UK. And so the game's still out there, but it's different now. I mean, the theme is still basically the same.
Okay. But
there's been additions to it, and the rule set's different and things like that. But the models are still pretty cool. Maelstrom's Edge, which was an indie sci-fi miniatures game. That one didn't it was. I've never seen it in a store. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those deals where the people that bought it. It made its goal, but that's about as far as it got.
Yeah, I did Joking Hazard. I think, did you play Joking Hazard at one of our company parties?
Yeah.
That was by the guys that do the Cyanide and Happiness comic.
Yep.
So that was kind of like a comic strip meets.
It's a card game, but you're like. Each of you tries to make your own 3-strip comic book.
You're trying to finish it.
Strip,
Yeah, you're trying to finish it. So there's like one or two panels depending on it, and then the third.
That's right.
The final panel is done by group, and you kind of vote on it. Sort of like.
Kind of like Cards Against Humanity.
Cards Against Humanity is what I couldn't think of.
One person gets to pick and go, yeah, this is the right one.
Right. So this was their way.
Apples,
even though they were kind of an established brand, this is their first going into that. And they actually have a new Kickstarter, I think, that's going on right now. It's called. Trolleys versus People or whatever, but it's basically, if there was 8 people on a train track, and the train's going for it, but there was a switch, but the switch would then kill a baby. Do you throw the switch or not?
I see. Okay, so it's a kind of a question style game,
right?
Would you rather do this or that,
right? And it sounds like there's add-ons like, well, what if the baby is going to is going to grow up to be Hitler?
Sure, right, yeah.
And so your job is to basically convince the judge that your side should not get hit by the trolley and the other side should get hit by the trolley.
Interesting.
So, it seems like fun. Bears versus Babies is kind of
we've played that here too.
Yep, that was done by the guy who does
Exploding Kittens, isn't it?
Yeah,
Exploding
Oatmeal,
Kittens.
the Oatmeal.
Yeah, the Oatmeal.
Yep.
Right, but Exploding Kittens was also another one of their games.
Yep.
Yeah. Let me see. I did the Giant Killer Robots. It's called Heavy Hitters.
Yes.
Giant Killer Robots is one of the first games produced by Weta Workshops, the guys who do the special effects for The Hobbit and all that kind of jazz. Yeah. And so they all of a sudden, they're down there in New Zealand doing their, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings stuff and all that, and other movies as well. And
11Zs.
And they're then evidently over 11Zs one day. They're like, well, what if we started making games? So they made this awesome, their first game, I think, is called Giant Killer Robots, and you get 4 of these robots in the box, and it's a gateway game, I think, in between miniatures and board games. It's got a lot of board gaminess to it, but it's also got some miniature stuff going on.
Very cool.
And the idea basically is that in the future, most of the big cities are all ruined, and so people live elsewhere now, or whatever the deal is, and so they have these giant robots that basically go to the big cities that are all ruins and kind of demolish the cities. Like they'll knock down the buildings and stuff like that, and it's all filmed and telebroadcast and all that kind of stuff. So there's like sponsorships, and there's like a lot of corporate messaging and things like that. And everything's kind of crazy and sort of tilted and weird. But you have these. Each of you has one big robot and then a bunch of smaller robots, and the big robots are painted.
Okay.
They're pre-painted, and they look nice. Yeah. Whereas the smaller ones are just in the same color as you, but they're not pre-painted.
Okay.
And then you're not only fighting against the other robots a little bit, but you're also trying to knock down skyscrapers and things like that. So there's plastic skyscrapers in the game, and then you kind of knock them down, and then there's like ruins, and it's a cool system, and it's an interesting game. And also a big box, something not as big as Ogre. And they did real well on, if I remember correctly, they did real well in getting their game out on time and everything. So that was really cool. And then also like just recently was the Hellboy.
That's right, you got the
game.
Hellboy one.
Yeah, Hellboy was cool. Hellboy, the board game from Mantic Games, which is interesting because, and we didn't kind of touch on this yet, but when we're talking about some of the changes and the things that are kind of like the way the pendulum is swinging, there are, at least in miniatures and in like gateway game kind of board games with lots of miniatures, at least, which again is my area, there are a lot of companies out there that are kind of bigger established companies that still do the majority of their stuff via Kickstarter. So I'm a company that's got 30 employees, but we're still putting out a new system and we're putting it out via Kickstarter.
Right.
And sometimes that's just basically, I think, risk management, where they're just like, well, if this doesn't sell as well as we think it is, then we'll know, or we won't be out a bunch of money, we won't make way too much product.
Right, you're not
going
to. We don't have to worry about stores not selling it.
But it got to the point with some companies that it was like, you guys don't need to. This system is designed for people who need the money to be able to produce this stuff. You guys can already produce this stuff.
Right. You've had 10 successes.
And you're doing this now. It seems as if it's a bit of a marketing thing, and that kind of stuff and whatever. And Mantic had done a number of projects that way, Mantic out of the UK. And they just announced recently their newest edition, third edition of their biggest miniature game, which is called Kings of War. And it's a fantasy kind of mass battle game, and they just announced recently that third edition is just going straight to stores. It's not going through Kickstarter. Okay. So again, that kind of goes back to about that thing about the pendulum swinging, I think.
Right. Yeah. Some are using and some are not.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, that was interesting. But the Hellboy game they did do in Kickstarter, which didn't bother me a ton because it's not in their normal wheelhouse. You know what I mean? Like, it's a board game, but it's also got miniatures.
Right.
But they're really more of a miniature company.
Right.
And it's also, the comic book is successful, but it's not Batman, it's not Superman, it's not, you know what I mean? It's not Marvel stuff. It's a little bit more indie, a little bit. There's been some movies.
I still think that's a great idea for the ones that are kind of branching out. Because
absolutely.
It keeps more variety in the game. We don't end up with the Hollywood of here's the
thing we know is going to
version.
make money.
Right. Here's the 14th version of
absolutely.
Saw.
Yeah, exactly. So, you got any other ones you want to mention that you've
I'm looking through. Yeah, I've got a bunch that are on order, but
yeah.
So you got the 1 to 2 year wait where you're waiting for them.
Only one that I currently have out there right now is Monster Terrain from Monster Fight Club.
Oh yeah, I'm on that one.
Yeah, you did that one too, and that one is some really nice. They're like trees for miniature games for like terrain, and but they're very modular and really cool.
Right,
and
and
well
pre-painted.
Done. And pre-painted, which is also very nice.
Yes.
And so and that one, everything seems to be on track. So I get the feeling it'll be. I think the due date on it was like December.
No, was it? I thought it was next May 2020.
No, I thought it was the end of this year. But either way, I think that they're going to probably hit it. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. And
we've talked to kind of the president of the company.
We met him at Gamma.
Yeah, and so and he actually was pre-selling a bunch of it at Adepticon.
That's right.
But it wasn't the final productions. It was like resin versions.
Yep.
And I ordered some of those, and I already got those. So I get the feeling.
Yeah,
and they're nice. They're really nice. And the new ones are going to be even like lighter plastic, which will be a little bit nice and probably easier for them to ship too.
Yeah. No. And I got them for DMing. So
it'd be great for Dungeons and
Dragons for the outdoor battles and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So. Yep. Yeah. I've got a few D&D books coming. One's an Ultimate Bestiary, which is some really cool monsters that kind of, not your standard stuff you see in the monster manual. So I'm excited about those. Odyssey of the Dragon Lords. This is like a whole campaign setting that's done by the lead designer from Baldur's Gate 1 and 2.
Oh,
and
okay.
he also did
video game.
Knights of the Old Republic. Yeah.
Nice.
So this is evidently he got a team together to put this out, and it looks amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And then immersive battle maps. So this is it's apparently a book, and it's the guy had already done his homework, worked with the manufacturer,
Right.
and
Because it's not a normal book.
no, yeah. So it's a fairly large book, almost like an atlas, where every page you open up, it's the 2 pages form a
Like a single map.
single grid, battle map. And then
Each spread, you mean?
right, each spread. And I think there's like 30 or 40 in the first volume that I ordered, and then there's
Is it spiral bound?
no, he's got it hardbound, but it's done in a way so it's loose, so it will still lay flat.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought it would be spiral, but apparently it's not. And he's
Yeah.
shown they did a whole bunch of research and figured out how to do this. And then they've got removable stickers, so you can add like furniture to rooms
Yeah.
and everything else. So yeah, that's actually supposed to be coming, and any time now. Really.
Yeah, oh, that's
so,
cool. That's very cool. And all this comes down to how are things going to change as Chinese tariffs, because the majority of this stuff is predominantly cranked out over in China.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of talk that's been going on lately about how this is going to affect, again, with the Chinese tariffs, is that going to affect prices? Is it going to affect frequency? Is it going to
Right.
affect
Is it going to affect ones that have already been successful but they haven't shipped yet?
Right, exactly. That's also the thing.
Like,
that can put you in a weird spot for a while,
Right,
depending.
where the company's like, well, we're going to be successful. We built in our margin, and then suddenly these tariffs could possibly put them in, back in the red.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that changes things. I think. It's also, and this is. We've talked a lot about these things and shipping and stuff like that, but there's also plenty of these companies that are also doing things digitally. And it's interesting to me, like, they do generally ship things a lot faster because they're not actually shipping it; they're just sending you a link or an email or whatever.
Right.
But sometimes I always wonder, like, if it's a digital, let's say, campaign for like a tabletop RPG, then I can understand about you want the money up front and all that kind of stuff, so you can probably most likely pay for a bunch of the artwork.
Right.
That's in a lot of game systems. That's the more expensive stuff.
Right.
If you're taking printing out of the equation, the artwork. If you want good artwork, it can cost a lot of money. But if you are, there's a lot of people out there, and you've been buying some stuff, and I've been buying some stuff where you're buying the 3D printer files.
Right.
So you can use your
The
3D
STLs,
printer to print, what dungeon tiles,
Terrain or
terrain, or
minis
whatever,
or-
that
yeah.
kind of stuff. A lot of times, generally, like, if they can show you a 3D render of it and say this is what it's going
Right.
to look like, it's already done. You know what I mean?
Right.
So they usually have shorter lead times where it's
Right.
not like going to take you. Well, it's going to take us 2 years before we ship it to you. Well, it's technically done now. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. In fact,
so-
the latest one actually that I'm on, they just had sketches. So they had design sketches.
Sure. And
So
that's
they
a different
did-
story. But yeah.
But at the same time, they've already shipped they instead of waiting for all of them to come out, they shipped their first design already.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's every like 1 week, 2 weeks, they're just cranking these out.
Yeah.
and then,
Which makes sense too, and it also kind of keeps it fresh. So
and it keeps me from having like suddenly 80 files that I'm gonna have to print.
Right, yeah,
I
yeah.
can do 1 or 2 at a time.
no, that's
and-
true too.
yeah.
Definitely. So yeah, I think that there's a lot. There's a lot to be said for Kickstarter. It does help people who are new to game design, new to manufacturing, and all that kind of stuff, be able to potentially live their dream or whatever, that kind of thing. And
And there's a lot of companies out there that are helping to make it easier to do.
That's true, too. That's a
pledge
very good point,
managers
yeah.
and stuff now, where they're helping
Yeah.
it's for add-ons or people choosing stuff, or like we talked about the shipping, figuring out your shipping.
Right, yeah.
People that go,
fulfillments and
yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah.
So it's becoming a more mature pipeline.
Yeah. And it does allow us as gamers to be able to get sometimes a whole bunch of stuff all at once, sometimes very specific niche stuff, and then that allows us to be able to share that with other people and our
Right.
kind of community and our group, either whether it's just our gaming club or our gaming group, or maybe it's people that you see frequently at the game shop that you might play with, depending on the type of game you play.
Right. And allows publishers to test waters of stuff they're not sure if that's
True.
really
Very true.
profitable side of their business.
Yeah. So it's definitely changed the way that tabletop gaming is done. Some people will tell you it's for the better. Some people will tell you it's for the worse. I'd say it's in flux, but it's not going away anytime soon. So
Definitely
we just
not.
thought we'd talk a little bit about it and try to explain it for people who are maybe newer getting into tabletop gaming, and hopefully using this podcast as a reference, kind of a tool to like learn a little bit more about, because people who've been in it for a long time use keywords and terms and jargon and things like that, and when you're getting new into the whole thing, it can be kind of difficult. So
it's definitely daunting. Yeah,
it can be. So, but it shouldn't be, because it's not that difficult, and we've all got phones that can teach us things, and
there is a wealth of knowledge at our fingertips.
Generally, yes, yeah, absolutely.
And cats.
What about on the internet? Right,
yeah.
I thought you meant there were cats at our fingertips.
Well,
I mean, pictures of cats, yes.
Yes.
That's true, very true.
Right, pictures of cats.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so thanks again for listening to this Thanks again for listening to this episode of the GameFor Podcast. If you've got questions or comments and you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment below. Let us know about what you're thinking about, Kickstarters and that kind of stuff. If you're listening via your favorite podcast player or just aren't into the whole YouTube comment section thing, then you can feel free to reach out to us via email at podcast@imgamefor.com. If you've got any ideas for future
topics or questions for us,
definitely hit us up at podcast@imgamefor.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And lastly, to find out more about the GameFor platform designed to connect tabletop gamers, download yourself an app on iOS or Android. Please check out our website at www.imgamefor.com. That is www.imgamefor.com.
Till next time, bye.
See ya.